want to share basically a for dummies version of 300 hours with 45 of the best entrepreneurs in the world. And the whole idea behind this talk is how do you pick your best ideas? What ideas produce billion-dollar outcomes? What are the qualities of the things that you bet your life on? What are the qualities of those ideas before you actually do that? Some of this might seem totally obvious, so if you can see these slides, I know lighting is very difficult to see. Hopefully you can take and sort of add it to the other ideas that you currently have in building your companies. Elon always says that starting companies is like eating glass. And you better love the taste of your own blood. And that's very common because you hear lots of stories about companies who've raised tons of capital and have experiencing lots of valuation growth and ideally the kind of blitz scaling that comes behind it. But there's a very polarizing marketplace today in that most venture capitalists are looking for early stage wins that sort of leap the chasm of the building phases. The Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world who solve a massive customer problem up front very often attract capital to get over those chasms in a very uniform way. So what we're going to talk about today is what do you learn from these interviews? And so I sat down, this is very, very loud, incredible. I think there's a concert going on over here. We're going to talk about the summary of the 45 interviews. This includes people like Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman, Sarah Blakely, the founders of Zipcar, TED, iRobot, Zappos, and others. How do they think about the lenses and instincts and the resulting impact that build their companies? How do they think about the world? And so this is summarized in what we call the 5 lenses. So as you're sitting here in the audience, just quick show of hands, how many people are actually building a startup as you speak? Okay, so a fair amount of you, okay? So as you think about your startup, your baby, think about it through these set of lenses about how are you building this? And the summary is, the first idea, thanks Aaron, shout out to Aaron. The first idea is the idea drawn or born from a proprietary gift? And you just heard the prior speaker, Lewis, talk about the idea of extreme focus, the capability, the unfair advantage you have as an entrepreneur. And very often we always fantasize about what we're going to do in our careers, where we're going to end up as a pro athlete. It's very unlikely those things happen. Or we're going to be a famous actor, actress, or a musician. Or we're in roles where we idealize ourselves, but the reality is that we don't have an unfair advantage. We don't have a giftedness to be there. And that what we're trying to seek is in our ideas is how are we leveraging something that we have that no one else has in the world to solve that problem, that customer problem. So that first lens of a proprietary gift, if you're just chasing white space, someone else is more likely born to beat you. That's the first lens. The second lens is how do you have an extreme focus on a single big idea? Very often we see investments and ideas where you have a single idea but has lots of attributes to it, lots of features, lots of marketplaces, lots of sort of barnacles around that idea to actually get it into marketplace. And so the best ideas typically have a very simple solution to a very large problem. And so we want to be able to go chase down those dark alleys very quickly to get to a solution that truly is solving a big problem in a simple way. To do that, it typically takes around 3 years of work. This feels like an inescapable law, but I've had now 5 companies in the last 22 years. I've had a small, medium IPO type exit. I've had soul-crushing failure, the whole journey, raised over 80 million in venture. But in those journeys, it typically took about 3 years to even figure out what business I was building, what was the problem we're solving. And no amount of money is going to solve time in the bottom of the problem. And that's why that focus, which Lewis just talked about, is so critical. The third lens is to build painkillers and not vitamins. This is such a truism to a lot of things that we invest in, is that a lot of ideas we wish they were actually painkillers solving a real problem, but the reality is that they're vitamins. People will try it once and leave. If the evidence is that you're not solving a large problem that people use, at least in an addictive pattern, very often your customers won't stick long enough for you to actually survive their learning. So that instinct of seeking painkillers is very, very critical in designing a solution to a problem. The fourth lens is whatever survives that funnel, that extreme, that proprietary giftedness that leads to an unfair advantage, with extreme focus on a single big idea, that actually is a painkiller and not a vitamin, the thing that you actually find that drives the value has to be 10x better. Typically, a 10x impact on the customer. If it's sort of incremental, 2 or 3 times better, it's a perishable value to the customer. Eventually, the competitors are not dumb. They will take the idea, steal the idea, and leave you with an incremental path for 2 or 3 years. So we want something that is overarching to drive growth that no one else can replicate. To do that, we have to have a monopolistic instinct. And this was one of the things that was so surprising to me in doing these interviews and spending time with these entrepreneurs, is how implicitly and explicitly they designed in permanence in the life of the customer. Whether it be data or services around a problem, they made it so sticky and so difficult for a customer to leave that they basically couldn't. There's a great piece this last week with Greylock around the virality of products that create a forcing function that force a customer to leave. The more the customer invests, the more difficult it is to them to sort of get out of your sort of Chinese finger torture. I used to believe that the most beloved company, the greatest brands would win, but in most marketplaces, it's the designed in permanence that wins marketplaces. Part of, I guess you guys are all probably familiar with Eric Ries's lean startup movement. He's a friend, and he and I have been leading a transformation of GE for the last 3 years. Now we're doing that at places like Citi and Nike and Exelon, Tyco, and others. One of the things that's so difficult to solve for is the truth, is the commercial truth. And how do you actually get to the truth with customers in such a way that you want to bet your life on it? Very often, and I'm guilty of this, and one of my first company was, I wanted something to be true about my customer behavior and the outcome I was driving to that simply wasn't true. And what you learn is, when you're the CEO for the first time, if it's not true to you, the CEO, it's very rarely true to your team, and it's never true to the customer. And it's sort of like it's an axle that everything rotates around. But when it is true, when you're dealing with commercial truth, when you're dealing with customers who behave in a way that produces an upward spiral, it's true to the team, and it's true to the marketplace, and it leads to extraordinary outcomes. In that context, wishful thinking is the enemy. I want to close with a couple sort of outcomes when you think through these lenses. Typically, the companies change in a lot of ways, but one is things become a little more predictable. Fred Wilson, one of my big investors in my last company, often said that the job of a startup CEO is very simple. It's 3 things. One is vision, and you have to be right. 2 is talent, and at least in your first 20 employees, you cannot make a mistake. It's a total fatal outcome. And the 3rd is never run out of money. As you're building these companies through these lenses, the predicting the chasm job of the CEO becomes incredibly important. And so your ability to stay objective, your ability to drive a truth, the ability to test and experiment to lead to those decisions becomes an incredibly critical aspect of success. I mentioned this before, but this is from Elon Musk. I'm an early stage investor in SpaceX and Palantir and other companies backed by Peter Thiel, who's one of our investors in the last company. And they always talked about the idea that this risk, the wishful thinking risk, what we hope would be true as an ideal state, is a massive risk for entrepreneurs that needs to sort of be undone. We have to have a radically candid conversation with ourselves, with our founders, with our teams, to make sure we're driving towards things that we are willing to bet our life on. To do that, we need to look at evidence that is what customers do versus what they say. Very often you can go to your relatives and friends and even do the classic sort of voice of customer research on your idea. And customers will tell you that they're willing to do something, that they love your idea, your investors, friends. But the reality is that we can only bank on things that they actually do, the behaviors we want to do. So we want to set up experiments, we want to set up environments that lead to behaviors, because very often customers can't tell you because they don't know. There's this kind of famous Steve Jobs axiom about he doesn't listen to his customers because they don't know what type of experience they want. We can only show them, and that's where the whole concept of MVP comes through. this is, again, have a tremendous amount of empathy here for you because you cannot see these slides very well, but they're kind of the total sort of TED Talk narrative here. So we have to be thankful for a great day and, brighter screens. About decisiveness. When approaching, this is sort of another mindset thing that came out of these talks, another huge aspect of this is around the cost of time and money. Very often we have experienced very, very difficult decisions that we have to make when we're building companies. We have two approaches we can take. We can take an incremental approach where we make small decisions towards that specific outcome. But very often the reality is that disruptive or catastrophic moments where our business assumptions sort of fall apart very often require us to take swift re-indexing of our expectations and our models. And we need to be able to either reset the business or cut once and move forward on a new reality. And that sort of radical candor is such a critical aspect of that, because when we don't make those tough decisions first, the hard time, we burn time, money, people, and opportunity that we can't get back. That's one of the challenges in building these companies. I'll close with these last couple points. The psychology of winning in building companies. There's a fantastic book by Poe Bronson that I highly recommend that talks about the psychology of teams that win versus fail. And he uses the sports such as soccer and hockey where you have a shootout. You have a tied score. You go into a shootout where it's a perfectly organized contest. And in the case of soccer, you have two strikers that each have 5 shots. 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4. The first striker has an 85% chance of scoring that first goal. So on a normalized basis, the way they think about that problem is they go all in. And if you remain tied 0-0 or you go up by a goal, you have nothing to lose, statistically speaking. And so therefore you go all in. You're playing to win psychologically. And therefore the statistics of actually winning go from 85 to 92% that you're going to score and win on that next shot. But if you actually go in and you're down by a goal, or you have to win that game, the probability that you score that next goal collapses below 60%. So you actually can't win. And so the psychology of how you place your bets, how you organize your time and energy towards these large outcomes, in a lot of cases you have to go all in because it's the urgency, it's the focus that creates the mindset for you and the team to actually win in an environment. I'll close with this last slide here, which is you cannot see, is that if you dig into the cultures that win, the ones that lead to the very significant economic outcomes, they typically have a balance of two extremely opposed ideas that survive at once. And the first one is extreme accountability, and the other is extreme forgiveness. And there's a great story about the idea of extreme accountability. It comes from Steve Jobs when he was alive. This is a true story of him in his conference room. There was a garbage can full of garbage. It made him very upset. So he ran out and found the janitor, and he brought him back to his conference room. And he said, "Why is there garbage in my conference room?" And the janitor said, "Well, the locks were changed. We're very secretive. It's your mandate, and I couldn't get in." And Steve Jobs thinks about this, and he looks at him and he says, "That's a good reason. Don't let it happen again." And at Apple, that's a setup because Apple is actually a fairly small company. So when you look at their sort of like $700 million, billion market cap, it really only has about 15,000 core employees. The rest are in retail. So 60,000 employees in retail, 15,000 in the corporate. And if you think about that relative to a size like GE with 350,000 employees and 1/2 the market cap, it is a very dense, wealthy company. For those 15,000 employees, there's only 70 VPs, 6 SVPs, and Tim Cook. It's an incredibly flat organization. And we became a VP at Apple. It was sort of like becoming a general in an army. You were there for probably 10 years. You had a net worth of 50 million at least. And Steve Jobs would bring you to his conference room and he would tell you the story of the garbage in the garbage can. And then he would tell you this: somewhere between me and the CEO, the janitor and the CEO, reasons don't matter. It's on you, 100%. It's an extreme accountability. You've heard probably in your own startup world that the buck stops with the CEO or the founder, and it's absolutely true. between the laws of ruining a brand and going to jail, like avoid those things. But you have to have a level of accountability that's unrealistic. On the same side, a diametrically opposed idea is you have to balance that extreme accountability in these cultures with the idea of extreme forgiveness. Without forgiveness, companies and employees don't take risks that transform themselves. We have a rule in our last two companies called the 7-to-1 rule, and it's a ratio of good to bad. We try to extraordinarily more good than we do bad in that ratio, which is basically an impossible equation. And the reason why it's impossible is that we want people to realize that no one is perfect. The CEO's not perfect, they are not perfect. We're going to fail each other in such a way that we have to have a default state that you're forgiven so we can actually deal with a failure and the truth. And so when we go after each other, when we fail, we're dealing with the problem and not the person. The fastest way to kill a company or a marriage is contempt. And so it's in this way that we can create an environment that people can go after opportunities that we failed at, fix them, and move forward without falling apart. So you need both of those things. You need both accountability in extreme sense and extreme forgiveness. I'll close with this. I've done about 30 angel deals in the last 10 years that range from lots of good ones, just recently the sale of Tapad, Palantir, Airbnb, SpaceX, and others, and a lot of really bad ones with great people. But across the board, the ones that were most successful were the ones that agreed what is good. They were ambitious. They had incredible purpose-driven cultures. They wanted growth. And very often, ironically, they left big companies to solve a problem that their big companies wouldn't solve, right? Because they didn't want to work in a big company, yet they started one to become a big company. Oh, the irony. But the point is that they had at the core a reason, a purpose for solving something that was truly dent the universe for the good. And so I hope that's not lost on you in the purpose of your companies when you think about what you're really trying to build towards. So I think it's my fastest talk ever at 16 minutes. So happy to answer any questions about this. This was an amazing personal journey. It was one that was required for me. I'd made some good decisions in building companies and some that struggled. But these lenses have been transformative for not only my new startup, but also the companies that we work with. So hopefully it's helpful. Thanks.